Brian's tracking some of that forecast. So are we. I mean, yes, the temperature has changed here. Obviously, we're seeing a wet track, and so we're already seeing a lightning alert as well. So there's been an advisory for those who were in these grandstands to leave just to make sure that they could be safe. In the meantime, we can still hear the concert going. So yes, there's rain. It's changed a little bit of the dynamic here, but we know people are still enjoying themselves and doing so safely.
Absolutely, and the safety part is what's absolutely paramount here. Right now, we're going to send things, because we're still here to have a good time.
Yes,
right?
It's
all about the fun.
It's
carb day. And what a time it has been. So many fans out here, and our man about town, Eric Graves, has talked to pretty much all of them. Hey, buddy.
And we thank Eric there for that live report. In the meantime, we've got the true man about town. The president of EMMYS, who has been scouting all of the amazing things happening today. And I know we have a little bit of Mother Nature trying to stop our party, but we're not worried about it.
You know, we got everything in. We got the racing in. We got pit stop competition. We got most of the fun in. We had the concert turned out. We had to cut George Thorogood short just a little bit.
Yeah.
We had a great day, though. It had a huge crowd, and it's a great way to kick things off as we lead in tomorrow in the parade, and then ultimately the Indy 500 on Sunday. And you know what, my fingers are crossed that this weather just leaves us alone. Make the decision, and then ultimately, if we have to, shutting the thing down.
And surely the message was heard, because we did see people flocking towards tents and towards safety. And I know that ultimately you want to run the race, but safety has to be top of mind. So what will be the final factor here in whether we see a delay or even a postponement for the race? You just mentioned some of the funding there for education. We know Hoosier students have been seeing lower test scores and also somewhat stalled education outcomes for almost a decade now. Both of your campaigns have suggested raising teacher wages as part of your education plan to address some of the learning gaps that we're really seeing. Ms. McCormick, you propose starting that teacher salary now at $60,000. Where would the money come from for this higher teacher pay? You have 60 seconds for that.
Yeah, so obviously education is one of my priorities. Since I left, we have fallen to 41st. So we're going in the wrong direction. I made my concerns heard when I was in office. I will continue to do that because I'll champion for kids.
And so how do you pay for that, though? The $60,000 that you're proposing here for teachers to fill some of the gaps and certainly increase the education outcomes.
Sure.
We'll give you 15 seconds for that
Yeah, the majority of the funding comes from the funding formula, which is state dollars. And $1.6 billion right now flows away from public education into privatization. So pausing that program will give us the monies that we need and our teachers deserve.
Mr. Braun, I want to turn now to you with this same question. You've also, again, proposed higher salaries for our teachers without giving a number. How much would you raise teacher pay to, and how would you fund that? 60 seconds for that response.
So that's going to be very simple. My sister was a 5th grade school teacher for her career, and I know what's important. She'll keep me straight on that. I served on our school board for 10 years. If you're putting that much into buildings and maintenance and upkeep, and you're not getting the most important thing right, which is teacher pay and benefits, to me, $60,000 is way too modest. That's nothing more than what we've done over the last 3 years of stepping it up about $1,500 a year. It's got to be competitive with some of the best wages we pay in the state, and you do it by running things more efficiently, not putting money into the buildings and the operations into the classroom.
So you've just said 60K is too modest. You want to be competitive. So for your sister, who was a 5th grade teacher, or for any others who are watching right now, what can they expect? What is the number that you would raise teacher pay to?
So here's what I'll do. I'll look at what peer states are paying.
More topics to get to, Beairshelle.
By next year, every state surrounding Indiana will have legalized marijuana in some form, bringing in some new tax revenue sources. Illinois and Michigan have brought in tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars. Ohio earned more than $11 million in its first week of sales, and Kentucky has brought in $27 million. That's just from applications for medical marijuana applications, or licenses rather. So now, many of our viewers had questions about marijuana legalization. So Ms. McCormick, first to you. You support overall marijuana legalization. Some law enforcement officers, though, have raised concerns about legalizing the drug, especially when it comes to public safety. What steps would your office take to address those concerns? 60 seconds on the clock for you.
Absolutely. So 80% of the Hoosiers, I hear you.
I'll take a lot of cue from the folks that are already supporting me, law enforcement, that would have to put up with doing it the wrong way.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, so if you have the right resources, you're hearing from experts that they back recreational legalization, is that something you would also sign? 30 seconds.
That is something I'll consider. Remember, I visit them every year, all 92 counties, and they can come visit me in my hometown, which I'll do when you elect me governor as well.
Thank you. We'll stick a bit with this topic here. Something that's somewhat been connected with marijuana in some cases is opioids. It certainly affected many Hoosiers, including one of our viewers, Angelo from Portage, and he asked this question here.
Back in 2019, my family and I were at a loss when our father suddenly passed away of a drug overdose. So my question is, what is your plan on combating the opioid epidemic in Indiana?
Mr. Braun, I turn to you first on this one. What would you propose for Hoosiers like Angelo when it comes to the overdose epidemic that we're seeing? It may seem odd to say this, but there was a bit of stillness outside of this Carroll County courthouse because really for 2,827 days there's been questions. How did this happen? Why were these girls murdered? But most importantly, who killed Abby and Libby? And this evening we have the answer. Richard Allen is guilty of murdering these girls. All 4 counts, guilty across the board here from this jury. So you can imagine what it felt like for people who were out here, who have been out here really for 8 years, trying to rally around this family while also searching for those answers. And again, we're talking about 8 years here. A jury has now determined they found the killer hiding in plain sight. They unanimously agreed Richard Allen killed the 2 girls near the Monon High Bridge. Their bodies were found on Valentine's Day in 2017. Now, despite no DNA evidence, prosecutors say an unspent round links Allen to the crime scene. And while evidence was leaked online, the case has been widely followed for years. Prosecutors say Allen's own words also led to his demise, words that Max Lewis heard inside that courtroom as you were right there alongside the families and people who have been invested in this case. Today you were right there the moment the jury also handed down that guilty verdict.
But that was it. He was let out of the courtroom in handcuffs.
Well, you know, before we move forward with what's next, because a lot of people are now focused on sentencing and then an apparent appeal that we can expect to come.
Right.
We also want to talk about what cases were laid out here. So for the defense, as we talked about, they said there was no DNA evidence.
Right.
They said these were false confessions because of mental illness that he was experiencing after almost months of solitary confinement.
Yeah.
But the prosecution also had some really strong arguments.
Yeah, I mean, the prosecution, look, I mean, the point is, or the fact is that, you know, Richard Allen placed himself at the bridge that day. He
voluntarily
voluntarily came forward to police a few days after the murders, wanting to be helpful apparently. Came forward, said, I was at the bridge that day, and placed himself there in the same clothes that bridge guy was wearing. And apparently his bullet found in between the girls' bodies matched to a gun at his house. And so that was clearly enough for this jury to convict.
And they certainly believe that. So Max, thank you for being our ears and eyes inside this courtroom for 18 days of the trial and here with 4 days of deliberation. So again, if you're joining us here and you've just learned Richard Allen found guilty by 12 men and women who listened to this case for nearly 3 weeks, trying to make sense of an investigation that lasted for 8 years. So the next part of this will move into sentencing. We expect that to happen on December 20th. But even beyond sentencing, again, we just mentioned it earlier, an appeals process is likely to take place, and the judge has already talked about what that might look like. But before we move into the appeals process and speak with our legal expert, we first want to talk with Michael Van Scoik, who spent the afternoon speaking with a lot of community members who we even saw throughout the last few days here, Michael, lining this courtroom and the courthouse with a lot of signage in support of Abby and Libby.
Back to you.
Michael, thank you. Of course, we will also be waiting right alongside this community to see what that sentence looks like. Now, again, for 8 years, they and the loved ones have been waiting for answers. And throughout those 8 years, we've had our team coverage of it, including with Russ McQuaid, who has followed this case from the very beginning. And here you are, somewhat at the end of the line here, where we have a guilty verdict. You were there the moment when all of that ran out of the courtroom and you heard people screaming, guilty, guilty. What was that moment like?
And that's when we were able to officially break the news of the 4 guilty verdicts.
As you were speaking to sources throughout the years, how confident were they truly that Richard Allen was the guy? And as they walked through this trial, did that confidence remain at the same level? Because we heard a lot of accusations and really a picture from the defense that was very different.
I will say this, in talking to my sources for over the years, they would tell me what evidence they had, and I said, but what about this and what about that?
And one of those details that you're talking about was the van, that we didn't know anything about the van in the way that he had described it, and they said only the killer would know. So can you remind our viewers here what it was specifically about the van that convinced prosecutors and investigators that this is the guy?
Which again, the investigators say, unless you're the killer, you would not know that that van was driving down that road at that time.
And this evening, the jury believes he is the killer. Convicted now is Richard Allen. Russ, thank you so much for your coverage here throughout the last few weeks. Again, this verdict is certainly echoing throughout the community. We have seen outside of this courthouse how so many people have been impacted by what just happened here. The 12 men and women who have decided that Richard Allen is guilty of murdering these two girls. And it remains a tragedy that has impacted this community in various different ways. I mean, this is unbelievable. There it is.
Totality.
Wow.
This is like nothing I have ever experienced in my life.
Truly unbelievable. I know I heard Max talking about it, but there's something so moving about this.
I can't believe this.
Take them off?
You can take them off, yeah.
Here we are.
Oh, my word.
Wow.
People are jumping up and down.
Oh, my God.
I can see my kids jumping up and down. It's amazing.
Keep in mind, it is
Can you believe we're experiencing this together? Now it's
We are in totality officially.
Although I think
Wow.
we've been there for a few seconds. Yeah, we've got 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
Oh my
total.
goodness.
Wow.
I think this just reminds you of the wonder of the world, right?
Wasn't it?
Just right before this, to see this crowd all united as one. We have 33 countries here at IMS and a silence all between all of us in that moment.
Fireworks.
I love it. And we've been able to see kids who are just in this wonderment, this moment. Adults who all feel like big kids. We're like, wait, what's going on?
I can't believe this.
So in the middle of the day to have this kind of moment, I mean, oh my God. So again, just to reiterate what we heard from Eric there, at the center of this trial, of course, Dorsey, charged with murder, is this insanity plea and whether or not that takes a role, and if he in fact knew the actions he was taking, or if the mental illness that clinical psychologists have diagnosed him with, both here in the court and outside, if that may have been a part of what happened here. So nearly 3 years of the family waiting for answers, looking for justice and closure after the death of their daughter, their sister, a woman who had been in law enforcement for quite some time and comes from a Leo family, her mom and dad in law enforcement as well. So now that entire community, as well as Marion County, eyes on this courtroom as we wait for the judge to come in and for that jury to release their verdict.
All right, so we will certainly continue to watch those live pictures. We'll bring you right back to the court as soon as the jury enters the courtroom as that verdict gets read tonight.
And now we want to move to a different story with IMPD. Earlier this afternoon, they released video from a police-involved shooting last September. That shooting led to the death of a man named Darmon Graves Jr.
Yeah, state police say Graves was the suspect in an arson investigation and it also violated parole.
Put your hands up! Put your hands up! Put your hands up! Put your hands up!
So again, that is video there edited by IMPD, just released here today, of the shooting that happened back in September. Officers moved in to detain Graves and give him first aid. We do want to get back now to this breaking news. Again, a verdict has been reached in the trial of Elias Dorsey, charged with killing a IMPD officer, Breanne Leith. We see the judge now has taken on to the bench, and we are waiting to hear what that verdict may be. So just to put into perspective, for 10 hours, this jury had this case deliberating, trying to figure out what that verdict would be. They took a break overnight around 3 a.m. to come back when they just simply could not come to a verdict. Yeah. And then sometime this afternoon around 1, they came back to the judge with several questions, which is a unique circumstance, but the judge seemingly now speaking. So let's listen onto this verdict now.
From the bailiff, the jury has reached a verdict. There were no questions from the jury.
So on all counts, guilty but mentally ill, which again was really the crux of this trial, his mental condition at the time of that deadly shooting in 2020.
And some of those felony counts include criminal recklessness, reckless homicide, again, several different counts and charges, but all of them coming back with a guilty verdict. And as we mentioned earlier this afternoon, just 5 hours ago, the jury had several questions about what was at the center here of this case, that mental health. And we do know the court-appointed psychologist had already deemed that he was mentally ill, perhaps even experiencing psychosis during this moment. But today, just moments ago, you heard it there, the jury said after all of the evidence listening to this, they still believe that Elias Dorsey is guilty, though mentally ill, of reckless homicide, murdering Officer Breanne Leith back in 2020.